Here we are for another round of the 70s versus the 90s, and we kick off Black History Month with the Black Private Dick that's a sex machine to all the chicks, with Gordon Parks's Shaft against John Singleton's Shaft. And this is another original versus remake one. And this one was a hard one to pick because both of these movies are really good, and both of them have iconic actors playing this very iconic role. And so let's just dive right on in to the nitty and the picky. First up, we have Gordon Parks's Shaft. And both of these movies are based off of the novel Shaft by Ernest Tidyman. I have not read the novel, so this is more not who's more faithful to the novel, it's more what is the better movie. So first up, we have Gordon Parks's Shaft. And of course, Gordon Parks was a photographer who became a filmmaker. You know, he did some of the most iconic photos of the 60s. And this is one of the most iconic films of the 70s. It stars Richard Roundtree as the titular character Shaft. John Shaft, who of course is a black private dick that's a sex machine to all the chicks, accompanied by the Oscar-winning song by Isaac Hayes. An incredible soundtrack. The music for this movie is just absolutely incredible. And of course, Richard Roundtree was like a model for like Jet and Ebony before he became an actor, and this was kind of like his first big role. And he owns the shit out of this part. I mean, that opening credit sequence where you just see him walking through the streets of New York, all on like 42nd Street with all them movie theaters and shit, and you know, just being cool as a motherfucker, you know. And of course, like every great movie star hero needs their own soundtrack, and Isaac Hayes provided him with an exceptional one. And of course, like Richard Roundtree, man, what this movie is like he's like those like private detectives that you would see in like film noirs of the 40s and 50s, you know, just a lone wolf, badass motherfucker that just don't take no shit, always getting shit from the cops, but still being like 10 steps ahead of everybody. And he definitely is that. And the film itself centers around basically a gang war that's about to pop off. The Italian mafia wants to take Harlem back, and they're trying to like edge out the main crime boss, played by Moses Gunn. And you know, they kidnap his daughter, and so he hires Shaft to find his daughter. And of course, Shaft's reluctant at first, but then he, you know, gets all the pieces together and he outsmarts all these motherfuckers. You know, there's a lot of great scenes in this film too. You know, there's a mutual respect for like everybody in Shaft. Like this motherfucker is like, he's like a man of the world. You know, he doesn't really like judge, ridicule anybody, even when he's fucking with the cops and shit. And they're going on with, you ain't so white, you ain't so black, you know, that kind of shit. You know, it's all like playful banter and stuff, you know, and they deal with a lot of shit. And even like that gay bartender that he, you know, runs into at that bar with them Italians are waiting for him to come home and shit. You know, he's like fucking around, the dude grabs his ass, he don't even really trip, you know. And of course, like he's like I said, way smarter than any motherfuckers in this movie and shit. And of course, gets, you know, a lot of poontang in this one too. You know, like hell, he gets done beating the fuck out of them Italians, goes home, bangs that fine ass broad Linda, and it has that very funny line that "close it yourself, shitty." And then that of course ends because that ending climax, you know, he also gets in league with a group of black revolutionaries who know Bumpy's daughter, and you know they team up and they rescue her and shit. Like this motherfucker, like, you know, a one man hit squad, you know, fucking like blast through the fucking windows and shit, like fucking Tarzan swinging on a vine and shit, and you know just fuck shit up and don't take no shit. You know, like I said, this motherfucker is bad as hell. And Richard Roundtree just plays it in a fucking cool manner. He doesn't say a whole lot, you know, he doesn't really let his intentions known. And also it comes from like the brilliant filmmaking of Gordon Parks, because that sequence when he goes behind that bar to fuck with them Italians, like you see the POV shots scanning of like what's behind the bars, the gun, all this shit, the cold calculating, you know, and just like I said, 10 steps ahead of everybody else in the film, you know. And of course, like he wasn't an image before this film. He became an image because of this film. He owned the shit out of this part. As we move forward to John Singleton's Shaft, which is a really good update of this material, but it's entirely different. The one biggest complaint that I have with it is they don't even make Shaft a private dick in this movie. Here he's a New York cop, which of course both movies take place in New York City, and then like, but I think the original one did a far better job of capturing like the streets of New York of the time. You don't really get like the sense of atmosphere in the remake and stuff, but we have Samuel L. Jackson as the title character. Now, I don't know if this is the first movie to do this, but I feel like this is the movie that kicked off that trend of remakes being like not fully remakes, but almost like kind of spiritual sequels, because Richard Roundtree pops up in this film as well as Uncle John Shaft. And like he's Samuel L. Jackson's uncle in the film, so it's pretty much like it's a whole new Shaft. You know, apparently the parents, his brother or sister, whoever the fuck was related to him, named him after him, you know, and so it just seems kind of weird, but that was a trend that would like really pick up, especially prevalent now, where it's like, you know, let's just connect everything up, let's just not fully remake it and stuff. But the film centers around a race killing. Christian Bale plays this rich, affluent white boy that is fucking with Mekhi Phifer in this fancy restaurant and gets pissed off and bashes him over the head with the fucking metal pole and shit. And Toni Collette, who plays a waitress there, she witnesses it, and she's being threatened by Christian Bale's character, so she runs off. And of course, dude's rich, so he's able to, you know, skirt the system and shit. So it, you know, Shaft makes it his mission to fucking get this son of a bitch. And then, you know, so they're trying to find the witness and stuff. And then, you know, later down the line, after he jumps bail and comes back, Christian Bale's character gets in line with a Puerto Rican drug dealer named Peoples Hernandez, which the best performance in this movie is Jeffrey Wright as People Hernandez, because like that motherfucker becomes that role, because it took me like 10 or so times of watching this movie to realize that that's Jeffrey Wright. Like that motherfucker just completely becomes the role, you know, and like, so you wouldn't expect that shit, but I guess he's light-skinned enough to pull off being Puerto Rican, but I don't know what the fuck you call that. I call it acting, you know. It's fucking brilliant as shit. And there's a lot of good like side characters too, like Vanessa Williams is one of the fellow cops in the film, and then you got Dan Hedaya, you know, one of the corrupt ones and shit. You know, there's a whole lot of shit going on in this movie, and like Busta Rhymes is one of the cats that helps Shaft out, do all kinds of shit. You know, like mainly the driver, so to speak. But like I said, it just doesn't have that fucking coolness that the original one had. Like what's cool about the original Shaft is that it's all about Shaft. You know, you don't really, maybe for a few like brief moments, you know, like when Bumpy and his henchmen go to Shaft's office, you see them without Shaft, but it's like almost like Shaft is watching them, you know. And then like, but the remake, you got all this side shit with like Christian Bale and Jeffrey Wright's characters, and you know, all the fucking, it almost gets to be a headache and shit. And also too, like by the time Samuel L. Jackson does this movie, this is like peak Samuel L. Jackson. Like he's not really, like he wasn't an unknown or nothing like Richard Roundtree. He just basically has an image that precedes him, and he kind of plays it more like Samuel L. Jackson. There are some great lines in this movie, like, you know, it's my duty to please that booty, you know, shit like that. But it just doesn't have that flair. You know, like John Singleton was a very great director, but I feel like there's just so much added shit, and that could be because of the times. You know, the thing about the 70s, the beauty of that decade was the simplicity of shit. You know, you didn't have to have a lot of stuff. Like the original Shaft just plays like a straight film noir and shit, you know, stuff, everything kind of comes into each other. And it kind of happens that way in the remake too. You know, I get kind of nitpicky for this because, you know, somebody's got to win it and stuff. But it, and of course, you know, it is a heavily more about race than the original one was. The original one was just really just black film noir, you know, which is kind of a double entendre, I guess, or whatever, however the fuck you would say that. But, you know, it's kind of like the shit that Humphrey Bogart would play just with a black man in it. And it's fucking brilliant, you know. So, I mean, this round clearly has to go to the original Shaft, because where I think that the remake of Shaft is a really good update, it is far from better than the original. I mean, there is some spectacular action in the remake of Shaft, but there's also a lot of silly shit. You know, there's silly shit in the original Shaft, but it's organic to the story. It's just what was the silly shit in the original Shaft was really meant to show the eccentricities of New York City. Like they really do a good job of capturing like the atmosphere of New York and the people that live in it and stuff. Whereas like the remake, you know, it's so kind of generic that you can't really tell, save for a few, you know, shots and stuff, that it's actually New York. So for anybody keeping score, that is 76 to 57. 70s are up by 19, man. This streak fucking continues. That lead continues to grow and grow. You know, they're kicking mucho ass and stuff. And it's like, you know, Samuel L. Jackson might be a better actor than Richard Roundtree, but he just didn't play it as fucking cool as Richard Roundtree does in the original, you know, and of course one that spawned sequels, and so this one spawned a sequel. The remake spawned a sequel too, but it's, you know, absolute dog shit and just don't really have that cool. You know, it's hard to do you can update this, but you can't really capture the essence of cool that this movie had. So 76 to 57. 70's up by 19. If I've said anything wrong, anything you disagree with, feel free to eviscerate me in the comments. It's just one asshole's opinion. You know, this one self-indulgent journey to see which decade is better for movies, the 70s or the 90s. And it's looking like I'm right, but you know, the 90s can always come back. So stay tuned for that. You know, this shit's really heating up. And you know, any film professors that want to use this stuff, feel free. But we got to talk compensation because, you know, nobody works for free. And all you film bros out there, eviscerate me in the comments. I don't really give a fuck. This is just, I'm having fun with this shit. I hope y'all are too.